Good evening there, everybody. Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that, of course, I would give my UFC 280 fight card review. Unfortunately, I don't think that this fight card quite lived up to the hype. It's not that overall it didn't have a good series of fights, but unfortunately, in my opinion, besides the exception of the Piotr Jan versus Sugar Sean O'Malley fight, I thought that the final two events, the co-main event and the main event, were, of course, kind of downers, but it is what it is. But congratulations, of course, to Mr. Aljamain Sterling for defending overall, I believe, his bantamweight title over TJ Dillashaw. And of course, congratulations to the new lightweight champion of the world, Islam Makhachev. I believe I'm pronouncing his name right. If I'm not, then please correct me. But anyways, we're going to talk about the final three fights overall of this UFC fight card. For those of you that may be UFC fight fans or wondering overall how the fight card went down, I'm going to break it down the best way that I possibly can. But just talking about the first fight, and I'm going to release my own video on this anyway if you haven't already seen it. So I'm not going to talk about it quite as much as what I did in this other video. But the first fight between Piotr Jan versus Sugar Sean O'Malley, it was a very decently competitive fight. I do not personally believe that Sugar Sean O'Malley deserved to win the fight. They did give it to him by split decision. I am not surprised because Sugar Sean O'Malley is a very big asset to Dana White. He is a guy all in all that you can very clearly tell makes a decent amount of money for him. And every single time that he fights, overall, there's always a decent amount of attention around him. He's almost kind of like the UFC's version of Ryan Garcia. You can tell that he's not really fully formed yet, but he is a decently talented fighter, a young gun. And on top of that, you can tell that, his promoter overall deeply has a great amount of investments in him because he can tell that he has the look overall, or that he has the charisma when it comes down to it. Depending overall on what you want to judge by, and on top of that, he is a very entertaining fighter. Now, do I believe that Sugar Sean O'Malley? Do I think that he won the fight? No, I don't. And in my personal opinion, I thought personally, at least with how long I've been judging UFC fight cards, and the UFC, unfortunately, is a little bit inconsistent with its scoring, sometimes even a little bit more inconsistent than that of boxing, because UFC doesn't really always have a direct way to score. In fact, even in certain times, they may have boxing judges scoring a UFC fight. I don't necessarily remember who the hell the judges were for the Sugar Sean O'Malley versus Piotr Jan fight. I just recently rewatched it. It was a little bit more competitive than what I remember. And even with that, I still thought Piotr Jan probably should have won the fight 3 rounds to 0. Maybe the first round you could have debated for Sugar Sean O'Malley, and I still personally would disagree just because of the takedown that he was able to land in the latter part of the round, and they were both able to land pretty much an even amount of strikes from what I've seen. The second round, in my opinion, was not at all competitive. It clearly was towards Piotr Jan. And when you talk about the third round, Sugar Sean O'Malley, I thought, was winning the first 2 minutes of the round. He even hurt Piotr Jan a little bit once again. But then later on in the round, the final 2.5 minutes, I thought clearly that Piotr Jan was winning that part of the round. Not only did he hurt Sugar Sean O'Malley a couple of times, I believe, he was able to take him down on 3 separate occasions. And for those of you that do not score UFC fights or MMA fights, scoring a takedown isn't necessarily like a knockdown in that of boxing, but it is supposed to be looked at as something that is going to give you a great amount of momentum for winning the fight. And the fact that Piotr Jan was able to score 3 separate takedowns, I believe, in that final round, in the final half of the round, and was able to completely take over Sugar Sean O'Malley within the final part of the round. Had that been a certain amount of other fighters, more than likely they would have got the decision. Or let me state this: if it would have not been against Sugar Sean O'Malley, more than likely they would have got the decision. And I've been reviewing fights for a very long time that many people have been claiming as robberies. Because many people, of course, are sports fans. They get over emotional and they claim that this is a robbery, this is a robbery. I remember when I watched Canelo versus Araceli Lara, and once upon a time, I used to think that that was a robbery as well. But now that I look at it from a much more logical standpoint, no, that fight was not a robbery. A lot of people will claim that the Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin rematch was a robbery. No, that fight was not a robbery. That was a close fight that could have went potentially either way. In my opinion, this fight was a robbery. And it's not that the fight was not somewhat competitive, but I just thought the fight clearly, according to the rules stipulations and overall what it could have been judged by, I think that clearly overall that Piotr Jan should have won the fight. And I'm not really going to go much more into depth with that. but the grappling, in my opinion, combined with his striking, but clearly just with his control that he had over Sugar Sean O'Malley, I thought that he clearly should have won the fight. But it is what it is. But anyways, just to continue on with the Aljamain Sterling versus versus overall TJ Dillashaw fight. Unfortunately, that fight, of course, ended up being the worst out of the three. And the reason why that was is because immediately in the first round, TJ Dillashaw was taken down by Aljamain Sterling. And then, of course, we realized a little bit later on that TJ Dillashaw apparently had a very bad shoulder injury, or that he blew it out a little bit earlier on in the year. And that caused his shoulder to dislocate a multitude of times. Very tough showing from TJ Dillashaw. But of course, unfortunately, that did compromise him. Now, with TJ having a great shoulder, would that have made a difference in the fight? Would the fight been any of different? I would like to believe so, but you never truly know. But I give Aljamain Sterling his credit. But when I take a look at TJ, not only is the shoulder, does that seem to be a problem, he looked absolutely exhausted in this fight. It just is what it is. It may be time for him to retire. It may also be time for him just to take a little bit of a break. We'll see. I would like to see him maybe in another fight because, of course, previously before this, he was able to defeat one of the top contenders in Corey Sandhagen, who I don't think is ever going to be the overall champion of that division as long as you have some of the guys here that you do. But I do think on the note that he's a very decent fighter, and TJ was able to beat him for some people for a controversial decision, but TJ Dillashaw was able to beat Corey Sandhagen. But do I believe that he's going to defeat Petr Yan or Aljamain Sterling? I'm not really sure if TJ Dillashaw is at that point in time in his career anymore. And on top of that, now that he got busted for steroids on EPO when it came down to it, we don't really know overall if he'll have the same gas tank or the same stamina or the same appearance as what he once did. And I like TJ. I think that he is a tremendous fighter, but we're going to have to see where he goes from here, if he truly will have a chance a little bit later on at becoming, the bantamweight champion for a third time. He certainly is one of the greatest fighters within that history's, division. And he's also one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. But I just don't know if his career is at an upward trajectory throughout this point. I said that TJ, in my opinion, would have to make Aljamain Sterling very uncomfortable. He would have to outstrike him because even though they both have A-grade wrestling, I thought that Aljamain, being the younger overall and slightly lengthier guy, that he more than likely was going to have a little bit of the advantage. And that did end up, being one of the main points of why TJ was getting out grappled in this fight. The dislocated shoulder, of course, did not help throughout this fight. But the big question is this: who does Aljamain Sterling go on from here? And overall, where does TJ go from here? I think TJ, I would like to see him in a fight, maybe with Marlon Chito Vera. I would like to see a fight there, maybe to see if he can still even continue his UFC career. And as for Aljamain Sterling, you never know. He could fight Sugar Sean O'Malley. He could fight a Marlon Chito Vera. He could fight a multitude of people throughout that weight division, whoever is going to be the next guy. Who knows, he may even move up a weight division, but I don't see that happening because that leads us to our next fight overall, and that is going to be the Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira fight. And of course, for those of you that did not know the results of this fight, Mr. Islam, of course, was able to beat Charles Oliveira. And not only was he able to beat him, but he was able to submit him, I believe, within 2 rounds. And that is a heavily impressive achievement when you consider the great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner and great all-around fighter that Charles Oliveira truly has become. You're talking about a guy that was able to dominate Justin Gaethje within the first round. You're talking about a guy that was able to submit Dustin Poirier, who was the favorite against him in that fight in the first, and I believe in the 3rd round, or within 3 rounds. And you're also talking about a guy that was able to stop Michael Chandler. So this was a dude that was on a streak on top of streak. He had completely revived his career. He had been completely reborn as a fighter. And Islam Makhachev, or Makhachev, however you pronounce it, he went in there against Charles Oliveira, and he pretty much dominated him. It just is what it is. He pretty much dominated him. In the first round, he was able to get him on the ground. Charles Oliveira very obviously was not able to really compete against that. And it's very obvious that for whatever reason, not really known to me, at least when it comes down to it, wrestling just seems to have a major advantage even over the greatest of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, especially ones that are either A, Division I wrestlers that may come from the AKA gym that of Daniel Cormier, or Sambo wrestling, which of course is a part of that, I believe, Cuban slash Russian style, which was trained, I believe, in the Olympics, when it comes down to, which is somewhat of a Greco-Roman style, I believe. Those Dagestan wrestlers are absolutely no joke whatsoever. And every single time that you see a high contender, no matter what the division, they always have a great amount of ability. And when it comes down to it, they always have a great chance of completely taking over the division. Habib Nurmagomedov, in my opinion, was clearly the greatest practitioner of the Sambo wrestling style, but Islam is right there with him. I'm not going to say that overall that he's greater than Habib. I think that he's about a step or two below of what Habib Nurmagomedov was, which shows you truly how great Habib Nurmagomedov actually was. But the fact that Islam Makhachev, the fact that he was able overall to really not fight any one of the elite guys of 155, in that of Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje or Conor McGregor or anyone like that, or Michael Chandler, and he pretty much got into this fight and was able to dominate Charles Oliveira from start to finish, and then on top of that was able to submit him like a little boy when it came down to it. It pretty much was very, very impressive. And it just goes to show, and I said this in my live stream, that that for whatever reason, the elite of the elite wrestlers in UFC, more than likely because of their offensive style or the way all in all that they're able to put them in certain positions, and on top of that, because of the brute strength of some of these wrestlers, like a Tyron Woodley or a Colby Covington or an Usman or a Habib Nurmagomedov or an Islam, combined with their physical strength, combined with their skills, and also a little bit of their jiu-jitsu abilities, because they do have to have a little bit of jiu-jitsu abilities. Otherwise, they would get run into certain submissions that the jiu-jitsu artist can set them up in. But combined with that Sambo style, with their jiu-jitsu, there really is no comparison. And Habib Nurmagomedov was able to show this. Islam was able to show this. And I do not have a very big doubt that more than likely there's going to be a multitude of other practitioners from the Dagestani gym or from the Dagestani parts that are going to show overall their excellence as well. It just is what it is. But tapping out Charles Oliveira the way that he was able to do within 2 rounds is certainly a special achievement. And it goes to show you that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, even though it is a great martial art, and at one point in time, when it came down to it, Jiu-Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was the new thing on the map in the UFC or mixed martial arts that pretty much everyone had to learn. Sambo wrestling is pretty much going to be the new style, in my opinion, that almost everybody is going to have to learn, because there really is no defense against this so far within the UFC. If you face a guy that is an extraordinary wrestler that also has a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background or is decent in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so far there has not been a great counter to that. Whether we talk about Kamaru Usman, whether we talk about someone like overall an Islam or a Habib Nurmagomedov, or someone overall that, maybe even a Colby Covington, because Colby, so far the only loss or main loss in his UFC career has been against a fighter that was just barely better than him in Kamaru Usman. It just seems for whatever reason that when you talk about these Division I wrestlers, especially of the Sambo wrestling style, when it comes down to it, that they just have a major, clear advantage. So it's going to be very interesting to see how certain people end up trying to counter this style. But more than likely, overall, if a certain amount of these fighters want to be successful over these type of fighters, they're going to have to go to the gym, or they're overall going to have to learn Sambo, that Sambo Greco-Roman wrestling style. Because if not, I really don't see how these people are going to beat someone like that of an Islam, or someone like an Habib Nurmagomedov, or some of these other wrestlers that not only clearly are very great in physically, in physical shape, like a Kamaru Usman or an Islam or a Habib was, but on top of that, how they're going to compete with that type of style. Their overall, what is the word overall that I'm looking for? Their technique is absolutely flawless overall, not only with the certain submissions that they can get certain people in, but also their defense and overall the way that they are able to keep from getting submitted, at least in certain areas. Even Habib Nurmagomedov, if you take a look at a certain amount of his fights, or Kamaru Usman, one thing also about wrestling is not overall just the ability overall to be offensive and get a certain amount of takedowns, but also their ability, and this probably comes from their knowledge of jiu-jitsu, their knowledge also of not heading straight into submissions. It almost makes them unbeatable on the ground, unless they have a equal somewhat on the ground, like when Usman was fighting that of a Colby Covington. But anyway, that's really about it for the video. I just thought that I would review that. Very great performance by Mr. Islam. great performance by Aljamain Sterling. Of course, it was against a fighter that had a dislocated shoulder, but it is what it is. He also was able to defeat Petr Yan as well. And of course, Sugar Sean O'Malley ended up getting the decision. I did not personally think that he won the decision, but we'll end up seeing what happens. If Sugar Sean does not end up facing Petr Yan in a rematch, I would like to see, him fight Marlon Chito Vera. Because to be honest with you, I think that would be, I think that any fight against any one of the top five, for Sean O'Malley would be a very difficult fight. But we'll see overall what ends up happening. He may be able to defeat someone like a Corey Sandhagen, maybe someone like a Marlon Chito Vera, but in my opinion, would he defeat someone like an Aljamain Sterling at the current moment in time? Not with Aljamain Sterling's grappling. Would he be able to defeat someone like a Petr Yan in a rematch? In my opinion, no. But with the way that they judge the fight, you never personally know. And there might be a couple of other fighters that at the moment I'm forgetting. But we'll see overall what ends up happening. But anyways, that's really about it for this review. Thank you so much for watching. We will see what ends up happening within these fights next. And that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.